Welcome to the Human 2 podcast, the podcast that investigates how we stay human and true to ourselves during challenging times in our professional lives, with a focus on the accountancy and finance profession. After all, accountants are human too. I'm Hannah, founder of Accountancy Hub and director of Human 2 Limited. I'm also an organisational culture consultant and an ICAW chartered accountant. Today I had the pleasure of talking to Matt Adamson, who is a Burnout and Career Coach, and he features on the Accountancy Hub platform. Matt specialises in helping professionals achieve sustainability in all areas of life, with his 20 years of corporate experience, most recently as an Executive Director at UBS. In this episode, Matt shares his personal experience with burnout, noting symptoms can be subtle and often go unrecognised. He reflects on the recovery process, the importance of therapy, and the lessons he learned about self-care and sustainability in one's career. We discuss systemic issues in the workplace, but the importance of personal choices as well. Matt is a big believer that as an individual, we have agency in preventing burnout and developing sustainable success. Sometimes burnout can be about a disconnect to purpose, self-limiting beliefs, and even a distancing from family and friends. This is a brilliant episode for anyone in a senior high-pressure role, or a business owner, or even accountancy and tax trainees who are in their early careers juggling work, study, and a personal life. Hope you find this episode as interesting and insightful as I did. Hi, Matt, and welcome to the Human 2 podcast.
Hi there, Hannah. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Just so that people know who you are, can you introduce yourself and give us a brief history of your career to date?
Well, the snapshot headline is that I'm currently a burnout coach, but the background to that is through lived experience of burnout, which came at a stage in my career where I'd been working in corporate for sort of 9 years or so. I started off originally a northerner, moved down to the Midlands for university, and then progressed on down to London when I realised that's where the money was. Working, first of all, with qualified accountants, helping them get jobs in various industries. Then qualified accountants, specifically helping them get jobs in banks, as I was a recruiter. And then taking that forward, I wanted to see a bit more of the world. And I had a few friends move to Hong Kong, and I went over to see them. I didn't expect to like Hong Kong because I'm a country bumpkin at heart, and my impression of there was just a big, crazy city, and it wouldn't be for me. But when on the first day there, we drove out of the city, hiked over a sort of beautiful mountain to a deserted beach. Well, deserted apart from the shack that sold us the beer. And we sat there on the beach. I was like, I could get used to this. So in 2008, when things were not great in the recruitment world, I remember my team at the time all getting calls pretty much on the same day from all of the banks. This is pre-Lehman, all getting their jobs pulled. And they were all like, oh, Matt, we've just had all of our jobs pulled. What do we do? And a good manager would have refocused them and given them some guidance, thought about what they do and how they make use of the time. Instead, I went, don't know, I'm off to Hong Kong. So the market wasn't much better there, but I could, as I say, go to the beach at the weekends and head over to Thailand. So again, I was running a recruitment business there. That was mainly what we call contingent recruitment, where the bank will inform or instruct 3 or 4 agencies to work on a job and then see who fills it for them. But then after a little while, I moved into executive search recruitment, which is heads of department and things like that. Got a bit of experience working in that sort of world. And then I joined UBS. It was a chance conversation with one of my clients from HR who said, have you ever thought about coming in-house on the other side of the fence? And I had, but I've not really thought about it too much. And she said, well, we've got a role going, covering finance recruitment plus risk and compliance. Do you fancy it? And initially I said no. But I spoke that evening with my wife, and she said, in good months, you're wonderful. In bad months, you can be a bit of a shit. So why don't you go talk about it? Because I'm not a natural salesperson. So
yeah.
side of the job, the sales part of recruitment, never really chimed for me. So yeah, going in-house with UBS was the single best decision I made in my career. It enabled me to see things from different perspectives. It gave me growth in terms of leadership and team management. I was able to get promotions. I suddenly found myself being responsible for a build out of an entire business in India and flying over to India all the time. Same then in China, giving me great regional exposure. It was a fantastic experience. The problem was, however, that I was sort of building that career on a desire to be liked and a people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever anyone said, "Oh, can you just take this, Matt?" Yeah, sure, I'll do that and make you happy. And ultimately, along with a few other things which we can touch on, that led me to burnout rather spectacularly in a way that cost me 18 months of my career and life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came back from that, when I was in a better place, I had the therapy, I had the counselling and everything. What next? And I realised it was going to be something to do with careers because that's where my authority and gravitas, my USP is.
Yeah.
But I thought at that time I didn't want to go back into the city. We'd moved back to the UK by then, and my wife goes up to the city every day. So two of us, not so easy anymore with the kids. So I thought, you know what? I actually got the help of a career coach to help me decide what I wanted to do. And I realised, actually, I want to do what you do. But the angle that I want to really bring to it is this notion of sustainable success, avoiding the same pitfalls of burnout that I did. I'd caveat that by saying that everyone's burnout looks different. One size fits all. Like, I know exactly what caused me to burn out, so that's the same for you. It's not like that. But there are certain commonalities and themes that we can work on to ensure that your career is only going to continue to go from strength to strength and not boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust.
It's not something we've really talked about before on the podcast, and I really want to delve deeper into this. So when did you start experiencing symptoms of burnout? And did you know it was burnout, or were you just thinking something doesn't feel quite right here?
I didn't know it was burnout, no. And it took presence of people around me to sort of hold up a bit of a mirror and show me certain things and help me see that things were not right. Looking back now, I can see certain things that were real indicators of it. A constant sense of fatigue was a big one. I was always tired. And I kind of thought that was just sort of normal because I worked crazy long hours. I had global calls. I was head of 3 different functions in APAC, and they all had global bosses with global calls, which meant I had to be online with APAC, Europe, US at ridiculous times of the night, a few days a week. So I kind of thought it was just normal, but no, it was a real sort of deep tiredness that I just, no matter if I just collapsed at the weekend to try and get some sleep or took a 2-week-long holiday, just wouldn't go away. So that was one element. Unfortunately, one thing was it was taking quite a lot of energy as well to present my executive self in work. I felt I couldn't be honest with my emotions. So I was always very highly commended for being hugely calm under pressure. You never seem to be worried or concerned. You always seem to keep it on a level, Matt, which is about as far removed from me naturally as you could possibly get. So it would take an enormous amount of effort to sort of present this image. And, part of that was good because you don't want to be in constant panic mode, but at the same time, actually having your team see that you're human is no bad thing. And the real cost that came from it was that as soon as I stepped out of the work environment, again, that exhaustion and that keeping it all in came out. So, short-tempered on a short fuse and anxious with the people that really mattered at home. So that was a big one. One that other people noted, but didn't necessarily particularly help with, unfortunately, was I got a little bit of feedback, particularly close to the time when I burnt out fully. Like, Matt, you're not smashing it out the park anymore. Where's the real energetic driven Matt? We're not really seeing it. And Yeah, I mean, I was becoming disengaged from my role. And this was the sort of symptom of it. I was no longer excited or energized by what I was doing. I was becoming cynical about it and not enjoying it. And that was obviously leading then into the way that I was presenting myself. And my performance started, it never became bad performance, but whereas previously I'd been on key talent programs within the organization and a noted high top performer, it became, yeah, I'm doing okay. Which then was even worse because I really needed that validation. That was a problem for me. I needed that validation that I was good, that I was brilliant, that everything was fantastic. And without it, that then sort of made the spiral even worse. So that detachment from work, that declining performance, that was also a clue. That was also a hint. So yeah, they were the big ones really. And as I say, I didn't really spot them. It took others putting that mirror up to go, oi, this ain't right, for me to really get a handle on it.
So all these things started to happen, whether you were conscious of it or not, and you didn't really realise it was burnout. So what actually happened for you to stop and take a break from work and be off for a portion of time?
To be honest, it was a bit of a sort of physical and emotional collapse at the end of the day. We were in Hong Kong. We were in lockdown there, and Hong Kong took quite a brutal approach to lockdown, sending people off to quarantine camps when they were unwell and things like this. So everyone was living on edge of, oh, I don't want to get sent away and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, I'm sure, as with many people, that whole time contributed to the issue. But my wife came in to the room one day. I was working underneath my son's bed because there wasn't much space in a Hong Kong flat. So I was on a desk under his bed. And she came in, she found me on the floor, and I was just sobbing. I was in tears. And I couldn't actually really tell you why. I didn't know. It was just a sense of panic, a sense of, I don't know how to get myself out of this. I don't know what's going on. Just complete overwhelm. At the same time, physical symptoms were presenting in terms of my blood pressure went through the roof. And, you know, I wasn't sleeping, headaches, all these sorts of things. And so it became a decision that was sort of somewhat forced on me in a way, because I wasn't well. Fundamentally, I wasn't well. And I would have kept trying and pushing on, I think, even longer. But people around me were like, no, you need to stop. You need to stop and take some time out. And in fact, that initially made me worse because my whole identity was tied up with, I am an executive director at UBS. When everyone asked me, you know, who are you? What do you do? That was my stock answer.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I wasn't. So what was I? Who was I? And that became quite awkward. So that real sense of identity going initially sent me deeper down into a sort of a depression and anxiety and all of that bad stuff. So yeah, it became clear that I needed to stop, and I got myself signed off on sick leave and actually never went back. And yeah, it took me a good 12, 18 months before I even really considered work again. I was lucky enough that, having been an executive director at UBS, I had some cash squirreled away, so I was able to take my time. Some people don't have that luxury, but I was fortunate that I did.
So interesting and awful, you know, and when you were having that break as well, you must have been thinking, how can I ever go back to a job like that? You know, am I ever going to go back? You know, is it going to be in a few months? Is it going to be in a few years, or perhaps never at all? What was going through your head sort of 6 months down the line when you'd left?
One of the problems that I was really struggling with at that point was confidence. So I wouldn't have dreamed of going back at that point to what I'd been doing previously, because I fundamentally had lost my confidence. How can I go back to that? I ended up being rubbish at it and burning out, which was the whole narrative that I was sort of still telling myself at that point. So yeah, you're right. I didn't feel I could go back to that. Also, the very idea of having the kind of conversations that had just been a daily part of my job previously suddenly started to make me go all anxious. And so I knew it wasn't right in terms of the time to go back to work, but I also knew I had a lot more work I needed to do to recover my confidence, to get back in touch with the things that made me good at what I do, to investigate further why what had happened, to learn those lessons properly. Because otherwise, going back, I'd simply make the same mistakes again.
So tell me a bit more about that recovery process. So you said you saw a therapist, you saw a career coach. How did they help?
I actually went through 3 different therapists. So that would be a message to anyone if they're going down that route is, don't just accept the first therapist as this isn't working, so therapy doesn't work for me, but actually just try and see and find one that works for you. Nothing against those other ones, but it took me the 3rd one before I really gelled and before they dug deep enough. I think perhaps the others that I worked with were sort of trying to deal with the surface level issues without actually going into the real deep down, dirty root cause of the problem. So investing a lot of time in that, and from the health perspective, I needed medication there as well, for the blood pressure problem that I spoke about, but also other symptoms, and I ended up going on medication for anxiety and depression and that side of things as well. So that helped just sort of take the edge off and get me back on that even keel. But yeah, then working with a career coach helped me recognize more what I was good at, where my strengths did lie, and really think about how I wanted to utilize that going forwards.
And now, of course, you speak to people all the time who are probably quite senior in their career, and you help them to have kind of sustainable success. Looking back now, is there anything that you would have done differently and that you perhaps advise people that you speak to? Or do you think it was the processes and the environment that you were in that caused you to burn out, and there's not a lot that individuals can really do about
that? It's an interesting one, that one, because when I first burnt out, I blamed my employer. I was like, they ended up putting, like 3 different jobs on me and making me speak to people at all time zones and all times of day and night. And more and more just got loaded on me, not just the official jobs, but the unofficial jobs and all of this sort of stuff. And so if you asked me that when I burnt out, I'd said, it's the systems in place, it's the organization. And I'm sure your listeners, your accountants going through qualification at the moment, really feel and experience that. But it was upon further reflection and getting distance from it further down the line that I realized those systemic pressures, I define them as the triggers for burnout. Those are the things that light the fuse. But actually the cause of the burnout is down to you and your reaction to those triggers, and actually what lies behind your reaction to those triggers. You see, some people are able just to take more and more and more and more and more and more pressure, and they'll be fine. And for a long time, that was me as well. But then there were things that changed and I didn't stay in touch with. So, yeah, it's also, people get quite affronted when I say that it's down to you and your thinking and the way you react, because they're like, my employers are being bastards. And they are. I have a real problem with certain environments, certain types of leadership, certain ways of operating, businesses putting shareholders at the core of their business rather than their employees. I mean, the data is staggering about how performance of businesses that put employee experience at their core is so much different to those that put profitability, shareholders, this sort of stuff at their core. They're aiming for profitability, where those that put employee experience at their core are not aiming for profitability, but actually, conversely, they get higher profitability because they're focused on their people. So, yeah, I hate those kind of environments, but it's your reaction to it, because otherwise you're disempowering yourself. You're becoming the victim. And you're saying, oh, there's nothing I can do about this. This is just going to happen to me. When in actual fact, although it's very, very difficult, you always have choices. You can look at those choices. I accepted extra work that I didn't need to, that I took onto my plate because I wanted to please people. I didn't take time off when I was sick because I thought that that wasn't the thing that you did, when in actual fact, taking the time off to get better, to get well, would have made me far more productive in my job. So things like this, you actually have choice. It can be very difficult to see when you're in it, but you do have choice, and it's about making and taking those choices. So yes, there's a lot needs to change systemically. And I'm really intrigued actually, because one of my jobs was I was the head of graduate recruitment for UBS and APAC for a while. And it was really interesting that the dynamic among the graduate population was changing. Whereas early 2000s, which is as far as my career really sort of goes back, the graduates, Goldman's, UBS, Morgan Stanley, they had the pick of anybody they wanted, because it's just, we offer loads of money, come and sell your soul. And everyone went, okay. But things have changed. And don't get me wrong, UBS and Goldman's and these banks, they still don't have any problem filling their graduate scheme. But they're having to get more creative, because it's not just an automatic default that they're going to get the best people anymore, because graduates are coming out of university and going, actually, what do I want? This generation seems to be far better at sort of rejecting typical notions of sort of working styles and saying there's got to be more to this. And, China was an interesting one to work in. That was an interesting market, because all of a sudden, rather than working for the banks or lawyers or accounting firms, everyone wanted to be the next Jack Ma and set up the next entrepreneurial startup that was going to make their billions and this sort of stuff. So, the dynamic is changing, and people are beginning to more reject those notions. So, and I think you and I discussed this a little bit before, those careers that traditionally, you sort of sell your soul for the money, they're struggling a bit more. They're becoming less and less attractive. So that is accountancy, that's legal, that's banking, because people are saying, there's got to be more than this. There's got to be a different way. And I really, really respect and resonate with that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how these organizations and these systems change over the next few years, because I don't think they can stay as they are. Unfortunately for those going through it at the moment, they still are. But I think there are signs of change and progress, but it is slow.
Yeah.
But to wrap up your point, there are issues with the system, but you've got to take control of yourself. And it's so difficult. It's so hard to see in the moment that you have choices and to make the choices that are right. But you've got to take that time to really review where you're at and why, and make different choices.
What do you think about, so, I mean, I can tell by what you're telling me that you've said you're a people pleaser. Sounds like you are very conscientious. You wanted to please people and do a really good job. Do you think people like that are more susceptible to burnout? And I'm talking about myself here as well. You never want to do a mediocre job or a bad job. So you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself at all times. And then if you're not saying no to stuff as well, you're taking on more and more and more. You've got more things to do well. I guess that's something that you've had most of your life, that sort of approach to work.
Yeah, that innate drive to do well. Ridiculously, it wasn't so much a desire to do well for myself as for other people, because I wanted the validation from them. Oh, that was really helpful to me. That was a really good job. Thank you. That was what I kind of lived for a little bit. So yeah, 100%. I think that high performing people pleasers really are, unfortunately, a very high risk of burnout, because they make choices that are not for the benefit of themselves. We take great pleasure in someone going, oh, thank you for that. That's really good. But, there comes a time when you're like, it's the aeroplane analogy, actually, isn't it? Where, you're encouraged to put your own life jacket on first. And it's true. You've got to look after yourself first. Look after number one, because that will actually then impact your ability to help others. Because if you're not in a good place, you can't help others. And it's being conscious of that when you're making those decisions and going, I'd love to help you with that, but I just haven't got the bandwidth at this time. You know, UBS would be getting far more help from me right now if I'd said no to a few things back along the way.
Yeah.
As it is, they don't have any access to me now. So, you know,
Yeah.
they're getting no help.
No. And I think you're totally right about, you know, Gen Z and them having different priorities and maybe not wanting to sell their souls for money as much as other generations. Some people will always want to do that.
Yeah.
And the prestige that comes with working for big banks and, you know, the big four and large law firms.
Yeah.
It's always something you're going to want to have on your CV. But Gen Z seem to be having a bit of a different mindset. And then they don't want to work long hours. So they might be still applying for those jobs, but then when they get there, they just have a different approach to work. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I think it's a really great thing. I think it creates a lot of tension within the organization because they're working for managers going, I went through this shit. Why won't you just take it?
Yeah.
So it does create challenge within the system, which is no bad thing also, but it can create real difficulties between previous generations and this generation. As I say, just not understanding why they're not doing what they should be, and working all the hours. But yeah, fundamentally, it's a healthy place to be. There's so much data coming out now. I mentioned this about the putting employee experience at the centre, but there's a recent Oxford University study that I think that study said it was 12%, but I've seen other studies that say it's as high as 30%, where your employees are happy, they are that much more productive. Right? So those old notions of leadership of, you know, driving somebody till they drop, basically, in an attempt to make them more productive, are actually completely counterintuitive and wrong, because it's actually about make the employee happy and they will do better work. They'll be more innovative, they'll be quicker, they'll be much more able to react and to respond and to change direction. So the key to productivity isn't milk them as much as you can, but give them the right environment.
Yes, and that's why culture is so important in general. And I love talking about workplace culture and everything that involves, you know, inclusion and diversity as well, systems and processes and resourcing and how you work well in a team and asking other people how they work at their best and just the whole environment.
Yeah, 100%. It's really interesting, actually, when you talk about resourcing, because coming across certain businesses, I mean, UBS we're pretty good on this one, but I have come across other businesses less so. This sort of notion of, oh yeah, we want to hire the best people and bring them in, and then they didn't work out, and we don't know why they didn't work out. And actually the real reason is they hired the best people, wanting everything that they brought in with them, and then told them what to do and how to do it. And it's like, well, why'd you hire the people that have the best skill sets and the best opinions and the best ability to do things if you're just going to tell them what to do and how to do it? Doesn't make any sense.
Interesting. Yeah. They've got to have the space to do what they do and do it well. Yeah. So you talk about sustainable success. Can you talk to me a little bit about the sort of people that you coach now and your top tips for sustainable success?
So to be honest with you, the majority of my clients are, as you sort of noted earlier on, they tend to be 30s, 40s. They've reached a stage in their career where perhaps the things that motivated and drove them initially aren't as relevant to them, and they've not necessarily identified that. They're like, I'm just doing more of what I used to do, and for some reason it's not fulfilling me in the way that it used to. I don't quite understand. So it tends to be people who have already burnt out. I love to get in front of people before they burn out, but it's so hard for reasons, as we mentioned at the beginning, that even I, you know, didn't really notice that I was or understand that I was. And so I've actually had very few clients where I've intervened and been able to prevent the burnout before it happened. So it tends to be people who have burnt out. And yeah, it's about learning the lessons from their burnout and making sure that they learn them. And I developed this little model. I call it my 3 buckets of burnout. And when I do a presentation, I've got these 3 red fire buckets that I point to. The first bucket is about the basic fundamentals of self-care. This one actually wasn't such an important one for me, apart from the lack of sleep, really, because I was doing a lot of what's important there. And it's not rocket science. I don't pertain to be a person to speak to about nutrition or about sleep or about breathing or about exercise and all these things. But it's not rocket science. No exercise is good for you. Rest is good for you. A good diet is important. And yet it's difficult to do those things, but you've got to. I think the big one for me in that area around self-care that I didn't do was the boundaries. I didn't have the self-respect to put the boundaries in place. And that was a big fundamental that I lacked. But I do see a lot of people struggle with that one because it's a notion of, I'll just get that bit more work done. I'll just get the next bit done. And the problem is the work never stops. You get something done and something else takes its place.
Or I'll just do it to get that next promotion. I'll just work this hard till I get that promotion. But then there's another one.
And then there's another one. Yeah, 100%, 100%. And you're just leading yourself down the path to burnout by doing that. You may get that first promotion. I did. But, there'll come a point where it's not sustainable. Everyone in their career needs to sprint at certain times. And, particularly in the accountancy industry, when you got month end, it's a fact of life. It's an inevitability. But you've also got to protect your energy and make sure that outside of those moments, you are really looking after yourself. One thing that I do to help with that is, it sounds a little silly, but it does help, is I really recommend to people that they create a happiness list. A list of things, a list of stuff that they do that makes them smile, that makes them happy. And then prioritize doing things on that list as a part of their regular day-to-day, as a part of their week. Because you can just fill it with more work and more work and more work and more work. But if you just take a bit of time out to watch that comedian that you really like, to spend time with that family member that always makes you smile, to go for that walk, to do that yoga session, just giving yourself that little buzz, little nice bit.
Love that.
It's so important and yet so often forgotten to do that. So just making sure that you have those kind of things in your diary. Diarise your meetings, diarise your self-care.
I really like that. And so many trainees that listening to this, they will relate to that because they are working full time. They're studying at the same time. There isn't a lot of time for hobbies and a personal life. That doesn't mean it's solid for 3 years. There are peaks and troughs, when you've got exams coming up. But I found when I was going through it, I did lose a lot of myself during those 3 years because, as you say, I just wasn't doing the things that make me happy. I was just absolutely focused on work and exams and pretty much nothing else. And so, just like you said, I talk to people now about just trying to, I haven't come up with a happy list. That is a great one. But just putting time, like literally scheduling time for watching comedy, going to a gig, spending time with your family, because I wasn't cooking anymore. I love to cook. I wasn't cooking. I love to watch TV. I wasn't really watching much TV because I was studying in my spare time. So you kind of lose your essence of who you are.
Yeah, you do. You do. And it's about recognizing that actually by connecting with those things that do make you happy, that make you smile, you're actually going to be better in your job. Just that feeling of happiness will give you more energy, will make you better at what you're doing. But you've got to be very intentional to make sure you get it.
Is there anything else that you tell your clients when it comes to that sustainable success?
So that was the first bucket, the first fire bucket, that self-care. The second one is around connection to purpose and values, that is a real big one, because, and it's different in different industries, like particularly in the corporate world, that lack of connection to purpose and values is a problem. But equally, I speak to self-employed, small business owners, charity workers, NHS, etc., who are too connected to their purpose and their values that they then ride over their self-care because they want to do more because it makes such a difference or whatever it may be. But having that connection to values and purpose is really important. And that also involves really getting clear on what success looks like to you. There's a great book by Sahil Bloom that came out relatively recently where he talks about the 5 types of wealth. And I like it because he does note that financial wealth is fundamental. Like, you need financial wealth. It's not something where you can go, I can just have an amazing life and forget about money. No. Money is important. You really need it. But as a metric of, true success, solely placing it on financial is a pretty rubbish way to consider it, because there's your mental wealth, there's your physical wealth, there's your social wealth. If you don't invest in those things like you're investing in your financial wealth, then you're going to come to the end of your career and you're going to be like, what was that all for? So yeah, another tip would be just really get clear on what success looks like to you. Be really intentional on identifying what's important in your life, not just the money. It's got to be there. It's a fundamental. And, ambition for promotions is no bad thing. It's a good thing, that forward momentum. Even stress is a good thing because it gives you forward momentum. It's when it becomes hyper chronic stress, that's when it's a problem. But yeah, just understanding why you want that promotion. Is it to fill some hole that's actually a bit of a problem? Or is it just because you want to be the best version of yourself, which is far more sustainable? So getting clear on what success looks like to you and why is a real big fundamental thing. And then that links into the final bit, which is limiting self-beliefs. I said, I let on earlier that a big part of my burnout was because I was constantly seeking validation. And it was interesting going back later. I always knew I wanted to make executive director, but I didn't ever really stop to think, why? Why is this promotion so important to you? And it was only really later after the event that I got properly in touch with it, once I'd burnt out and been recovering and everything. And I realized it was such a ridiculous reason. In certain careers, and banking would be one, if you're in it for long enough, you'll find that you get the experience and people start to look up to you and you get a promotion to certain levels. So I saw like typical ranks like VP or director. If I'm there long enough, that should come. But not many people make executive director. So if I make executive director, that's validation that I'm good, because at the crux of it, my limiting self-belief that I held is something that coaches love talking about, is limiting self-beliefs, but nobody thinks they're there until they really look at it. But the belief that I held was that I wasn't good enough. And I'd really set my career up and made choices in my career to try and disprove that. And that is really not sustainable. So taking the time to really understand why you're doing these things and unpicking any negative beliefs that you have about yourself. And the key there is look at the evidence, because we create these narratives in our head that we just hold to be true. But actually, if you look at the evidence, it's like, oh, yeah, I have passed those exams, so I do know what I'm on about. I am working for a good company, so, clearly I have value. I've achieved this, I've achieved that. That's another point, actually. I always recommend journaling, because it's so easy to focus on the negatives. There's a real good book that I love by a guy called Mo Gaudat, who used to be the chief innovation officer at Google, like the dream job for somebody from his engineering background, but he was fundamentally unhappy. And he's taken this data-led scientific approach to seeking happiness. It's called Solve for Happy, the book. And one of the things that he notes is that scientifically, the synapses in your brain are focusing on threat, on negative. It also links into another book that I love, The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters, where it's this primeval sort of mechanism designed to protect you when, the threats were lions and tigers. Now it's chronic stress. Yeah, your brain is wired to protect you and to look out for those negatives, to the extent that it's so easy to neglect the positives. And so by actually writing down at the end of every day, what are you proud of? What have I done well? What made me smile? What was good? It forces your brain to think about it, which it doesn't like. Like, I get people to do this exercise and they're like, oh, for the first 2 weeks, it was horrible. Like, I hated it. Your brain will reject it. But actually, once you get into the rhythm of it, it starts to become easier and it starts to sort of begin to have a bit of an impact where you're like, oh yeah, I did do that. That was good. I am good at what I do. It's really, journaling is a top tip, but actually just more broadly being clear on, what are the negatives, beliefs that you hold about yourself? What are the positive beliefs? And just looking at the evidence, studying the evidence. Is that really true? That narrative I have about myself? What's the evidence say? What does fact say? Because it's so easy to completely build an incorrect narrative.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I love journaling, by the way. I do it once a week and I just do a grateful list. And I think that really grounds me, because whatever has happened that week, good or bad, and you can stress over little things that in the grand scheme of things don't really matter. And when you write the grateful list, it's just sort of like, I've got my health, I live in a lovely flat in London, I have amazing friends and family. And you just they're all the things that matter at the end of the day. And you might have spent half the week stressing about something that doesn't really matter, really.
Yeah.
So I find that helpful.
Yeah, it can be so easy to think, in a way that you're sort of the star of your own movie. And that has two implications, in that one, every little mistake you make is sort of earth shattering. I was like, no, it's not. Like, zoom out, bigger picture. You made a mistake. 99.9999999% of the world doesn't care. Like, it really doesn't matter. How you come back from that mistake is far more important. But also, people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. You're thinking, oh God, I made that mistake. Those four people are all constantly now going, he's an idiot, she's an idiot, he's rubbish at what they do, she's rubbish at what they do. No, they're not. They've forgotten about it. It's only you continuing to sort of talk it through in your head. They've moved on.
It's so true. It's so true. So I just briefly want to pick up on the fact that on your LinkedIn profile, it says stay-at-home dad, which is quite iconic, Matt. You don't see that a lot. You really don't. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it. I might have seen it. No, I don't think I've ever seen it. So was that the time when you had burnt out and you had 18 months sort of out of work? Was that your stay-at-home dad moment? If so, what did you learn from that time?
Yes, it was part of that time. I also, during that same time, that was when I was sort of recovering and realizing I wanted to become a coach. So going through my coaching training as well and doing all of that side of things. So it incorporated that piece. In terms of what it gave me, what I learned, it was just further reinforcement of the notion that all these different types of wealth are important. And I am somebody who really gets a lot from sort of societal connectivity wealth. I need my community, and some of that is my family. Real big part of that is my family. Burnout is a horrible, horrible thing to go through. Like, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But in a perverse way, I'm really grateful I did, because I have had so much more time with my children than I would have done. I've seen so many more sports fixtures, so many more dance recitals, so many more school events. I simply wouldn't have seen them. And you know what? It's really important to me. And for some other people, it's really important as well. Some people it's less important, and that's not to say it's a bad thing. But, for me, it's so important. And just holding on to that notion as I now plot my career moving forwards, I know time to go and do those things is a fundamental part of what I need as a fundamental metric of success. If I get into a job where that's no longer possible, it doesn't matter what the money is, it's not success because I don't get to do what's really important.
Mhm.
So I learned through that more about myself and just how important my kids are to me. And you know what? My eldest is 12, and it terrifies me, the fact that he's only 6 years from buggering off to uni. So, you have a finite amount of time with them. So, I want to make sure I spend that time. So that was the real learning from that, about ensuring that I had the balance to get those things, or I haven't actually been successful.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message. And also, a conversation about gender roles and breaking them. And that, it doesn't have to be that it's the mum that stays at home for a while and takes time out of their career. Dads can do it too, and they can get so much out of that.
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I can't claim for a big chunk of that time, I can't claim to have been as much of a gender lead as it might appear, because living in Hong Kong, childcare is very affordable. So everybody has a nanny and things like this. So I wasn't as hands-on as a parent in the UK might have had to have been. But, I was still, I was taking my daughter to nursery every day on the bus, picking her up from nursery every day. I was doing some shopping, all of this sort of stuff. But equally, I wasn't necessarily the primary cleaner in the household, for example, because we had somebody to do that and all that kind of thing.
But you were there. You were there.
I was there. I was present. I was very present, and I was very involved. Moving back to the UK, obviously that changes the dynamic a bit, and you do have to be a bit more hands-on. But yeah, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of, sounds naff, but like female empowerment. Like, women make an impact on boards. The FTSE companies that have a more diverse board are the more successful ones. So it shouldn't just be that it's naturally the man that goes out and earns more money and is the big breadwinner. Actually the best person in the household to do that might be the woman, and that needs looking at, that needs exploring, and she needs to have the freedom to pursue her career. And that's one of the amazing things that Hong Kong gave us, because of that affordability of childcare and everything like that. It enabled both of us to have a career and to explore that and to see my wife's career take off. So yeah, I mean, in a way I'm very lucky, because there isn't huge fundamental pressure on me to keep the wolf from the door in terms of money and income. Like, we have a good income from my wife, but that's one option that should really be on the table for any household. It shouldn't just be automatically it's the man, not the woman.
Yeah, totally. This podcast is all about accountants and business people being human too. What makes you human?
Fallibility, I think. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. Even though I now know a huge amount more about what caused my burnout, doesn't mean I'm perfect. Doesn't mean I don't make mistakes and find myself tending towards some of the burnout things again. But it's being okay with that. We're human, and recognizing also that I am a human, and therefore I'm finite. My resources are finite. I can't do everything. There's a book. I'm trying to think of the author's name. I think it's Oliver. Is it Oliver Berkman? I think it's called 4,000 Weeks. Anyway, which is shockingly how long we get. We've got 4,000 weeks, and you can't hope to do everything in that time.
Yeah,
doesn't seem long, does it?
No.
And he refers to, I think he credits to Warren Buffett, I think, where he says, make a list at the start of the year, make a list of everything you want to achieve in that year. What you're trying to achieve in all aspects of your life. Write that list out, then prioritize it. You'll probably find you've got about 30 or 40 things that you want to do and achieve. Then remove everything below number 5. Because if you accept that you're finite and you have finite resources, if you try and do everything, you'll miss the big things. So focus in on what's truly important.
Absolutely love that. Do you ever miss your UBS career a little bit? And do you ever think maybe one day you'll go back into a big leadership corporate position?
Yeah, I do miss it. I miss the people. I miss the community. I miss pushing myself in different ways. Like, so many different problems would get thrown at you and you're like, right, okay, how do I handle this one? The mental gymnastics that you have to do, I find it fun, weirdly, perversely. So yeah, I absolutely do miss those days. I get something very different from what I do now, and that's right for me now. But yeah, 100%. I think I will at some stage quite possibly go back to the corporate world, and I think I'll be hugely, if someone takes a chance on me to bring someone back in after a period of time, I'll be hugely better for it, because you know what? I mean, I used to lead teams of 70, 80 people, and knowing now what I know about, for example, coaching, God, I'd be so much of a better leader than I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to think, and I've got plenty of testimonials to say I was a good leader in the way that I looked after my teams and I made sure they were okay and all this sort of stuff. But I'd have certainly done things differently.
In what way? What would you have done differently?
Well, sometimes it's things like not letting your team see the problems. I want to protect them. I want them to think it's all okay and not let them see the problems. Well, actually, if you let them in on that, if you let them see behind the curtain, almost as it were, then A, they're going to trust you more because you've shown more trust in them to show them the reality a bit more. But also then they're part of the solution. You can co-create solutions with them. You can get insight from them, ideas from them. It's not just about, I won't let them know and I'll handle this problem. Well, actually, bringing them into the problem, giving them some agency and authority to come up with solutions is so much of a better way of working.
Yeah, super interesting. Final question. I ask this of every single guest that comes on the podcast. If you could go back in time and have a cup of tea with your younger self, maybe as a teenager, maybe when you're in your first job, what would you say to them?
It would really be some of this stuff around get in touch with who you really are. Like, I carried around this belief that I wasn't good enough for so long, and it made me make so many bad decisions and maybe be a people pleaser and all of this sort of stuff. So get in touch with who you are and your strengths and your value. Know your value. And some of that will come with experimentation. I see a lot of people putting a lot of pressure on themselves early on in their career to get in touch with their purpose. And I run a business that encourages people to get in touch with their purpose. But don't put too much pressure on that. Don't feel like you've got to go work for a charity from day one straight out of university and you've got to do that. It's about experimenting, trying different things. Don't just go down the one career path. I mean, I fell into mine. I never wanted to be a recruiter. I'm not a salesperson. I completely fell into it. But just taking different things from experiences and building that picture of who you are and your value and your values. So important, because there'll come a time, late 30s, 40s or whatever, that if you aren't clear on that, it's going to have consequences.
Perfect way to end the podcast. Thank you so much, Matt. This has been a fascinating conversation. And I mean, one of the best we've had, just so many insights, so many books I'm going to have to go and read now. And I'll put all of these in the show notes. But thank you for being so open and honest about your burnout, because I think that will really help a lot of people and prevent it happening to them, especially if they can, start spotting the signs as well.
That's a big one. It's so hard to see it. So if you can be a bit more aware of it and look for them, hopefully that can really help.